Before the sun rises over Las Vegas, before the traffic builds, and the city wakes up, a quiet townhouse sits with its garage door wide open. Nothing appears broken. Nothing appears disturbed. But inside that house, time has already stopped. A woman lies on the floor, surrounded by blood, her body stiff and cold. She did not die peacefully. She did not die by accident. And she did not die at the hands of a stranger chosen at random. Within days, investigators would realize this was not a crime of chance, but a crime of planning. Not impulsive, but deliberate. Not chaotic, but calculated. And at the center of it all stood a man everyone trusted. A firefighter. A father. A husband. This is the true story of Shauna Tef and the betrayal that ended her life. In the early morning hours of Saturday, September 29, 2012, Shauna Tef finished her shift at the Palms Casino in Las Vegas, Nevada. She clocked out shortly after 3 o'clock in the morning, just like she had done countless times before. Security cameras captured her walking through the employee corridors, her posture relaxed, her movements routine. She had no idea that this ordinary moment would become the last record of her alive. Shauna was 46 years old. She worked nights as a cocktail waitress, a job she had held for more than a decade. In Las Vegas, cocktailing was not just service work, it was a career. The money could be excellent, the environment fast-paced, and the competition intense. Shauna thrived in it. Coworkers described her as upbeat, warm, and hardworking. Someone who smiled easily. Someone who treated people kindly. Someone who showed up and did her job without drama. That morning, after a long shift on her feet, Shauna drove roughly half an hour back to her townhouse. She parked in the garage and entered quietly. She did not turn on the lights. She was tired. She wanted to sleep. She never made it upstairs. Hidden in the darkness of her home was a man waiting for her. The attack was swift and brutal. There was no warning, no opportunity to escape. Shauna tried to protect herself, raising her hands as the blows came down. Her fingers fractured under the force. The weapon was a hammer. When it was over, Shauna Tef was dead on her living room floor. Hours passed. At around 9 in the morning, a man arrived at the house with an 8-year-old girl. The garage door was still open. That unsettled him. He went inside. And then he ran back out, dialing 911. On the recorded call, his voice trembled as he told the dispatcher that his wife was on the floor, not moving, covered in blood. He said he was a firefighter. He said he had been at work. He said he didn't understand what had happened. His name was George Tef. And from that moment forward, nothing about this case would be simple. To understand how Shauna ended up on that floor, you have to go back long before that morning, long before Las Vegas, long before George. Shauna Tef was born in March of 1966 in Salt Lake City, Utah. She was raised in a large Mormon family with 6 siblings. Her childhood was structured, religious, and conservative. When she was 12, her family moved east, first to Pennsylvania and later to Virginia. She attended South Lakes High School, where she stood out for her personality. She was social, stylish, and confident, a cheerleader. Someone who enjoyed attention and connection. After graduating in 1984, Shauna eventually felt drawn back west. In the mid-1990s, she moved to Las Vegas to be closer to her sister. The city was nothing like her upbringing, but Shauna adapted quickly. She worked in upscale retail, then transitioned into the casino world. When the Palms Casino opened in 2001, she landed a coveted cocktail waitress position. She loved it. The energy, the people, the money. On busy nights, Shauna could earn hundreds of dollars in tips alone. She enjoyed her independence, she enjoyed providing for herself, and she enjoyed the life she built. It was at the Palms that she met George Tef. George was born in September of 1972. He grew up on a chicken ranch and learned discipline early. His father died when he was young, and responsibility came fast. He excelled academically, graduating as valedictorian and earning admission to the United States Military Academy at West Point. After serving in the Army Corps of Engineers, George transitioned into civilian life and became a firefighter in Las Vegas. He was respected, reliable, charismatic. To those who knew him, George embodied trust. He helped people. He wore a uniform. He was a father and a provider. Shauna was drawn to him. They began dating, and within a year, their daughter was born. In March of 2006, they married in Hawaii in a picturesque beach ceremony just days after Shauna's 40th birthday. From the outside, they looked happy, but appearances can be deceiving. By 2008, the Great Recession hit. Las Vegas was hit especially hard. Tourism slowed, construction halted, housing values collapsed. George lost money in real estate investments. Stress flooded their marriage. Arguments became more frequent. George grew controlling. He criticized Shauna's clothing. He resented her night work. Shauna, fiercely independent, pushed back. Another source of tension entered their lives, a homeless man George hired to do odd jobs around the house. George saw himself as helping someone in need. Shauna felt uneasy. She said the man made her uncomfortable. She said she did not feel safe. By April of 2012, Shauna moved out. They were separated but still married, sharing custody of their daughter. Shauna hoped counseling could fix things. She believed in second chances. Then, weeks before her death, something terrifying happened. Her townhouse was burglarized. Someone broke in, used her shower, stole her wedding ring, took a pair of her swimsuit bottoms, and left behind a pair of small boxer shorts. The break-in deeply unsettled her, but she convinced herself it was random. 3 weeks later, she was dead. As police began investigating, suspicion initially focused on George, but he had an alibi. He had been working a full shift at the firehouse. His daughter had stayed with his mother. Nothing placed him at the scene. The case stalled until a man came forward with a chilling confession. And with that confession, the truth began to surface, a truth far darker than anyone imagined. If this story already has you questioning who you can trust, stay with me. And if you value careful, respectful true crime storytelling, take a moment to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and hit the subscribe button. Because what happened next would expose a plan so calculated, it would haunt everyone involved. The first real break in the case came from a man who had nothing to gain by speaking up. His name was William Penix. William was not a suspect, not a witness to the crime scene, and not connected to Shauna's life in any obvious way. He was a maintenance worker in Las Vegas, a man who lived quietly and believed in helping people who were struggling. One of those people was a homeless man he knew by the nickname Greyhound. Greyhound lived in a tent in the desert foothills outside the city. He drifted between shelters, parking lots, and empty spaces on the edge of Las Vegas. He was an ex-con trying, unsuccessfully, to keep his life together. William had helped him before, offering food, conversation, and guidance. But in late September of 2012, Greyhound said something that chilled William to his core. He told him he had killed a woman. According to William, Greyhound spoke casually, almost matter-of-factly. He said he had beaten her with a hammer until the handle broke. He did not describe panic. He did not describe remorse. He described completion. William did not wait. He went straight to the police. At first, detectives were skeptical. Confessions from unstable individuals are not uncommon in high-profile cases. But the details Greyhound mentioned, the weapon, the method, aligned too closely with what investigators already knew. Police set out to find him. They learned his real name was Noel Stevens. Stevens was known to steal food from grocery stores and occasionally sell drugs near a gas station. Officers located him on the street and detained him on drug possession charges, bringing him in for questioning. At first, Stevens denied everything. He said he never killed anyone. He said William misunderstood him. But police needed more than words. They needed proof. Detectives launched an extensive search of the desert foothills where Stevens was known to camp. They searched on foot. They searched by helicopter. Eventually, they found his campsite. Nearby, partially hidden under brush, they discovered a rolled-up pair of pants. They were stained with blood. The pants were sent for testing. When the results came back, there was no doubt. The blood belonged to Shauna Tef. Confronted with the evidence, Noel Stevens broke. He confessed. He admitted that he had hidden inside Shauna's home, waiting in the dark. He admitted that he attacked her when she came home from work. He admitted that he used a hammer. But one question still hung over the investigation. Why Shauna? Noel Stevens had no personal relationship with her, no history, no obvious motive. So detectives turned to his phone. What they found changed everything. Stored inside were dozens of calls and messages exchanged with one specific contact, George Tef. When investigators asked Stevens who George was, he answered plainly, "My friend, the firefighter." The connection investigators had been missing suddenly snapped into place. Stevens was the homeless man George had hired to do odd jobs around the house, the same man Shauna had said made her uncomfortable, the same man she had feared. The more detectives dug, the darker the picture became. Phone records revealed that George and Stevens had contacted each other nearly 90 times in the month leading up to Shauna's death. This was not casual contact. This was coordination. According to Stevens, George had offered him money, $600 up front, thousands more after the job was done. The job was killing Shauna. Stevens told police the plan did not come together all at once. It evolved. First, George suggested staging an accident, striking Shauna and crashing her car, but that risked revealing head trauma. Then they discussed suffocating her, but Stevens worried about leaving DNA. Eventually, they settled on the house. George gave Stevens a key. Stevens admitted he had entered Shauna's home multiple times before the murder, learning the layout, watching her routine. The burglary weeks earlier was not random. It was rehearsal. Stevens admitted he stole her wedding ring and underwear during that break-in. He admitted he left the boxer shorts behind. It was all part of the plan. Surveillance footage backed it up. Detectives obtained video from a hardware store showing George and Stevens together, purchasing a hammer, gloves, and a knife weeks before the murder. Stevens later led police to the buried hammer. The handle had snapped during the attack. The barcode traced back to that purchase. As the evidence mounted, George's carefully constructed image began to unravel. 9 days after Shauna's death, police met with George's family to explain what they had uncovered. The family was stunned, disbelieving, horrified. Shortly after that meeting, George dropped his daughter off with his mother. Then he got into his truck. He accelerated onto the Summerlin Parkway, reaching nearly 90 miles per hour, and slammed into a barrier. There were no skid marks. Investigators believed it was a suicide attempt. George survived because he was wearing a seatbelt. From his hospital bed, George Tef was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Noel Stevens pleaded guilty the following year in exchange for a deal that spared him the death penalty. He agreed to testify. At trial, Stevens took the stand. He admitted everything. He admitted breaking into Shauna's home. He admitted attacking her. And he testified that George Tef ordered the murder. He said the open garage door was a signal, a sign for George, that the job was done. The defense attacked Stevens' credibility. He had a criminal history. He admitted to hallucinations. He stuttered under stress. But the details he provided matched the evidence too precisely to ignore. George did not testify. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated. On September 3, 2015, George Tef was found guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to life in prison. Shauna's family sat in silence. A daughter lost her mother. A city lost a woman who had lived fully, worked hard, and trusted the wrong person. Today, Shauna Tef is remembered not for how she died, but for how she lived independent, warm, and resilient. Her case stands as a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous betrayal comes not from strangers in the dark, but from those closest to us. If this story moved you, take a moment to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and hit the subscribe button for more carefully researched true crime documentaries. Because remembering these stories is one way we honor the lives that were taken and ensure they are never forgotten. Even after the guilty verdict, the story did not truly end. For George Tef, conviction did not bring acceptance. From inside prison walls, he insisted that he had been wronged, that the system had failed him, that the jury had believed the wrong man. 2 years after his sentencing, in 2017, George began the appeal process alone. His attorney had withdrawn from the case, reportedly because of the direction George wanted to take. So George did what he had always done throughout his life, when faced with pressure. He relied on himself. From his prison cell, George wrote a handwritten petition that stretched over 100 pages. Every line was written in his own hand, every argument carefully structured. In that petition, he claimed ineffective assistance of counsel. He argued that his defense team failed to properly challenge Noel Stevens' credibility. He insisted that Stevens, a homeless ex-con with a history of mental illness, had fabricated the story to save himself. George also introduced a new explanation. He claimed that at the time of the murder, he had been taking prescription medications for an injury sustained while working as a firefighter. He alleged that these drugs affected his judgment and mental state. More disturbingly, he wrote that he believed he had been influenced by divine instruction, that he had been told by God that Shauna needed to die. The court rejected the appeal. The evidence, they ruled, was overwhelming. The phone records, the surveillance footage, the hammer, the key, the payments, the testimony. There was no reasonable doubt. George Tef would remain in prison for the rest of his life. For Shauna's family, the legal proceedings brought little comfort. Her sister Paula had suspected something was wrong from the very beginning. She had voiced her concerns within hours of Shauna's death. Those instincts, painful as they were, proved correct. But knowing the truth did not ease the loss. Shauna's daughter was only 8 years old when her mother was killed. In a single day, she lost her mother. And in the years that followed, she lost her father to prison. Her childhood was defined by a crime she did not choose and could not understand. Friends and co-workers at the Palms Casino mourned Shauna quietly. They remembered her laugh, her work ethic, her kindness. They remembered a woman who showed up every night, did her job, and treated people with warmth in a city that often feels cold. Investigators who worked the case later described it as one of the most disturbing betrayals they had seen, not because of the violence alone, but because of the patience involved. This was not a moment of rage. It was weeks of planning, rehearsal, manipulation, a crime outsourced to someone viewed as disposable. The burglary that terrified Shauna was not a warning from fate. It was a test. The open garage door was not carelessness. It was a signal. And the 911 call that sounded panicked and desperate would later be understood as something else entirely, the final act in a carefully staged performance. Today, the townhouse where Shauna died looks ordinary. The desert foothills where evidence was found are quiet. The Palms Casino continues to glow every night, filled with tourists who have no idea what happened to one of their former employees. But Shauna Tef's story remains. It reminds us that danger does not always look dangerous, that trust can be weaponized, and that sometimes the person who calls for help is the one who set everything in motion. If this documentary made you pause, reflect, or question how well we truly know the people around us, take a moment to like this video. Share your thoughts respectfully in the comments, and hit the subscribe button for more in-depth, carefully told true crime stories. Because every victim deserves to be remembered. And every story deserves to be told. What makes this case linger is not only the brutality of the crime, but the calm precision behind it. There was no struggle between strangers, no spontaneous explosion of violence, no random target. This was a crime built quietly, step by step, inside a marriage that was already breaking apart. Investigators later reflected on how easily the early warning signs were dismissed. Shauna had expressed fear. She had told people she felt uneasy about the man George brought into their lives. She had been shaken by the burglary and unsettled by what was taken, personal items, intimate items, signs that someone was not just stealing, but watching. Yet, like many victims, Shauna tried to normalize the danger. She believed it would not happen again. She believed she was safe. And that belief cost her life. For law enforcement, the case became a sobering lesson in how credibility can shape investigations. In the earliest hours, suspicion fell on the husband, as it often does, but George's uniform, his career, and his calm demeanor worked in his favor. Firefighter, veteran, father. Those labels matter. They influence perception. They buy time. It was only because someone with nothing to gain chose to speak up that the case moved forward. William Penix did not know Shauna. He was not chasing attention. He simply believed that hearing a confession meant doing the right thing. Without him, the case might have remained unsolved. And Noel Stevens, deeply flawed and unreliable as a witness, still became the key that unlocked the truth. Not because he was trustworthy by nature, but because evidence followed him everywhere he went. In court, prosecutors emphasized that Stevens did not know Shauna's work schedule. He did not know her routine. He did not know when she would be alone. George did. The planning required knowledge only a spouse could provide. That reality cut through every attempt to shift blame. When the verdict was read, there was no celebration, no sense of victory, only finality. A woman was gone. A child's life was permanently altered. And a man who once saved lives would spend the rest of his own behind bars. In the years since, Shauna's name has become part of true crime history, but for those who knew her, she was never a headline. She was a sister, a mother, a co-worker who stayed late and covered shifts, a woman who believed people could change. Her story is a reminder that optimism, while admirable, does not always protect us. That discomfort should be listened to. That fear is not weakness, it is information. And perhaps the most unsettling truth of all is this: Shauna did everything right. She worked hard. She provided for her child. She tried counseling. She tried compromise. And still, she was betrayed. Cases like this force us to confront uncomfortable realities about power, control, and how easily trust can be turned into a weapon. They challenge the idea that danger always announces itself loudly. Sometimes it wears a uniform. Sometimes it speaks calmly. Sometimes it makes the 911 call. If you've stayed with this story until the end, thank you for listening with care and respect. If you believe stories like Shauna's deserve to be told thoughtfully and responsibly, please like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and hit the subscribe button so you don't miss future documentaries. Because remembering is one way we protect others, and silence helps no one. Long after the courtroom emptied and the headlines faded, the impact of this case continued to ripple outward in quieter, more painful ways. For Shauna's daughter, life became divided into two parts before that morning, and everything after. She grew up carrying a truth no child should have to carry: that one parent was taken from her through violence, and the other was responsible for setting that violence in motion. There was no version of the story that did not hurt. Family members on both sides struggled with the same impossible questions. How could someone who spent his career rescuing others plan something so destructive? How could warning signs feel so clear in hindsight, yet remain invisible when they mattered most? Psychologists who later commented on the case pointed to a pattern that appears again and again in domestic homicide for hire cases. Control is the driving force. When control is threatened by separation, independence, or loss of status, some individuals seek to regain it by any means necessary. In this case, money was not the motive. Freedom was. George Tef was facing divorce, financial pressure, and the reality that Shauna no longer lived under his authority. Hiring someone else to carry out the act allowed him to distance himself emotionally, to believe he could erase a problem without getting his own hands dirty. But crimes like this always leave fingerprints. Not just physical ones, but behavioral ones. The repeated phone calls, the rehearsals, the test burglary, the insistence on control even after death, shown in the staging of the scene and the calculated discovery of the body. Investigators later said one of the most haunting aspects was learning that the open garage door was intentional, a signal, something designed to communicate success, not to invite help. That detail reframed the entire 911 call. What once sounded like panic now sounded rehearsed. What once sounded like shock now sounded delayed. And what once sounded like tragedy now sounded like performance. For law enforcement, Shauna Tef's case became a training reference, a reminder that appearances must never outweigh evidence, that trusted professions can hide dangerous behavior, and that listening to those who feel unsafe, especially when they express fear inside their own homes, can mean the difference between prevention and regret. For the Las Vegas community, it was another reminder that the city's bright lights often cast very long shadows, that behind the glamour of casinos and nightlife are real people living real lives, facing the same dangers and struggles as anywhere else. Shauna's co-workers remembered her laugh echoing across casino floors. They remembered her kindness toward new hires. They remembered how she talked about her daughter with pride. They remembered her as alive. And that is how she deserves to be remembered. Not as evidence, not as a victim alone, but as a woman who lived fully, worked hard, and trusted the wrong person. As time passes, cases like this risk becoming just another story told online, another name in a long list. But each one carries lessons that matter. Listen when someone says they feel unsafe. Take fear seriously, even when it does not make sense yet. And never assume that goodness can be measured by a uniform, a title, or a reputation. Because sometimes, the most dangerous lies are the ones told calmly by people we are taught to trust. Thank you for staying with this story. If you believe thoughtful, responsible true crime storytelling matters, please like this video. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and hit the subscribe button to support the channel. Every story remembered is one silence broken. And every silence broken makes it harder for something like this to happen again. As the years move forward, the case of Shauna Tef continues to surface, not because of shock value, but because of what it reveals about how danger can hide in plain sight. There were no screaming arguments caught on camera, no public breakdowns, no dramatic warning that something irreversible was coming. Instead, there were subtle signals. A woman saying she felt uncomfortable in her own home. A marriage strained by control and resentment. A burglary that felt personal, not random. Signals that, when viewed alone, could be explained away, but together formed a pattern that only became clear after it was too late. One of the most unsettling truths about this case is how ordinary it looked from the outside. A firefighter, a cocktail waitress, a shared child, a separation that appeared civil, counseling sessions, shared custody. Nothing about it screamed danger. And that is exactly why it matters. Because most people imagine violence as explosive, chaotic, and obvious. But some of the most devastating crimes are quiet. They are planned in conversations, in phone calls, in favors asked, and money exchanged. They unfold patiently. In this case, the person who ultimately wielded the weapon was not the architect of the crime. He was a tool, manipulated, incentivized, and discarded. The real power was exercised long before the hammer was ever lifted. That distinction is crucial. It reframes responsibility. It reminds us that distance from violence does not mean innocence. George Tef never entered the house that night. He never stood in the hallway. He never faced Shauna as she tried to understand why this was happening. But he set every step in motion, and the law recognized that. For investigators, the case reinforced a difficult reality. That motive does not always look like rage. Sometimes, it looks like inconvenience. Sometimes, it looks like entitlement. Sometimes, it looks like a refusal to let go. For families watching from the outside, it reinforced something else entirely, that leaving can be the most dangerous moment in an abusive or controlling relationship. Shauna had already taken that step. She had moved out. She had reclaimed space. She had begun redefining her life. And that shift, that loss of control, became the trigger. Today, George Tef remains incarcerated, serving a life sentence. Noelle Stevens remains imprisoned for carrying out the act. And Shauna's daughter has grown up with a story that shaped her life without her consent. There is no version of this ending that feels just. There is only accountability and remembrance. Shauna Tef was not perfect. No one is. But she was not disposable. She was not an obstacle. She was not a problem to be solved. She was a human being. And the reason her story still matters is because it forces us to confront a hard truth. Evil does not always look evil. Sometimes it looks responsible. Sometimes it looks respectable. Sometimes it sounds calm on a 911 call. If you've stayed with this story all the way through, thank you for giving it the attention it deserves. If you believe stories like Shauna's should be told with care, context, and respect, please like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and hit the subscribe button to support the channel. Because behind every case is a real life. And behind every statistic is a name. Shauna Tef.